This is housing?
This is how.
Yes.
There's quirks that we're dealing with. HVAC flow. We haven't figured out which controls, which rooms.
Okay.
Monday night, eating in this room, it was freezing. It was, to say it, it was,
Yeah.
we were glad to get out.
And some rooms are freezing or you go in another one.
Yeah.
Oh, it looks like your window's open. That's a plus.
They do open.
Yeah, that's rare.
When it, in nice days.
Yeah, that's a big plus. Yeah.
Although, when they were still doing the cycle, steamroll.
One of my favorite stories about a building under completion was from Jerry Harbison. They were, the new high school was being built, and the township was ready to come in for the final inspections. School district said, don't worry about it. We got lots of great professionals. Everything's under control. Township can just stay out of it. There's no reason to come out here. There's no reason to look at final inspection. Well, the township inspector walks in, pulls the fire alarm. Nothing happens, complete silence. And this is like the day before it was supposed to open. Okay, we're going to look at some other things now. Really? Okay.
Like tons of litigation on some kind.
Oh,
Was that the one where,
On and on and on for you.
like, they had, the alarm would go off during or the toilets were all set up for motion detectors, and when the flash would go off, all the toilets would flush,
the flash would go off?
like, when the alarm would go off.
Oh, okay,
the flash would
okay.
activate.
Okay, that's funny.
So all of a sudden, all the toilets.
Give another couple minutes or get started. All right. Well, we'll get started. Just so everyone knows, it's being recorded and streamed. So far, no one is on. So it's
That's with the camera, just so you know.
it's
So I'm out of camera range.
yes, you are.
That's good.
I feel safe back here, although they can hear me. So welcome to meeting 1 for the housing work group, part of phase 4 of South Whitehall Township's 2021 comprehensive plan update. My name is Chris Rabasco. I'm a planning associate with Michael Baker International. I've been working closely with my colleague Hannah Clark, who's running the resource protection meeting over there, and the township staff, Greg Adams and Dave Manhart, pretty closely through this whole phase 4. Since we're going to be spending a couple meetings together, I figured we should start with just brief introductions. If everyone would like to go around, and start with Dave.
Dave Manhart, Director of Community Development for Southwest. Bill McNair, I'm on the Planning Commission. I've been a resident for 40 years.
I'm Charlie Schmale.
This is Dave Kennedy, Parkland School Board, which has nothing to do with this, and I've been a resident for about 38 years.
Yeah, Mark Andrews, I'm a resident since 19.
Steve Shortell, I'm a resident since 1973. I'm a realtor, licensed realtor, with that since 1988. So I thought housing was different.
Great. Thanks everyone for joining. Should have a couple of productive meetings as we build towards some recommendations for housing in South Whitehall's future. Just want to remind everyone that we're going to be going through the workbook, which looks like everyone has one.
I have
Would you like
pieces
you
of
got
it.
pieces of it? Okay.
I printed.
That's great. So as we go along, just make sure you're taking notes, and it'll really help us run the discussion template. Okay. So yeah, with that, I think we can get started. And just so everyone keeps in mind that we'd like to run this from the perspective of through the residential lens. I know a lot of people have positions here, but we kind of want to keep this to, like I said, the residential lens as best as we can. So starting here with the workbook, I'm sure most of you attended our introductory meeting before we had these breakout groups. We can briefly go through some of the materials that were presented at that meeting. Basically, this entire process is to run through existing conditions that'll go and help us build out recommendations, consult with some subject matter experts. We have Valley Planning Commission, which will be coming up next week. And through this entire process, we are following elements of the municipality's planning code, which dictates some of the thoughts we're supposed to keep in mind and guidelines as we go through this process. Our 5 working groups do reflect some of the required plan elements of the municipality's planning code. So that's why we decided to break up the groups as we did. As you go to page 2, you can see the timeline. We are here for meeting number 1, existing conditions. As we look ahead, our next meeting will be July 20th. That is a Tuesday from 6 to 7:30. That one will be virtual with LVPC. Don't recall our specific date for meeting 3 for this group, but it'll be the week of August 2nd, and more information will be coming on that. As we go to page 3, we have, this was more useful for the online version, some links to some helpful resources that a lot of you hopefully have paged through. We sent out, every working group has a subpage that you can go to and find information specific to that group. That's where this meeting recording will be posted. There's other useful things there, such as the Google form. So if anyone that's at home wants to make sure they type in some input, they can go to the Google form, and the same discussion template is posted there. Also, if for some reason a thought pops into your head that you forgot to mention here, that's also open for anyone here to put in any input that they want at any time. We have our contact information on there. Just feel free to shoot any of us an email at any time, and we can clarify anything for you about this entire process. Won't spend too much time on the rest. Guiding principles were established in the introduction meeting that almost go along with the MPC, and almost all these can be considered in housing recommendations, specifically coordinating land use. Maybe the 4th one, sprawling patterns of development, smart growth attributes. Again, I already touched on the MPC guidelines and how it dictates the comprehensive planning process and how future growth and development will occur and how we can best accommodate that. We also in this process should consider, when it comes to recommendation, short and long-term implementation strategies that may help us build recommendations. And we're just looking for overall compatibility and adherence to some of the ideals of the planning code. Earlier in March, we had not the introductory meeting, we had a kickoff meeting for phase 4, where we gathered some public input on the view of South Whitehall Township today. It's, clearly the bigger words are what people said the most. So there's a lot of opportunity here. People think opportunities become more diverse. It's a growing township. And in the future, a lot of similarities, opportunity, exciting. Also, a big feature of the township, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is trails, parks, open space, some of the highlights from our previous public outreach. Framing concepts were presented at the first meeting. There's an overview of the growth and future land use scenario, which informed some of the scenarios that were then run by Todd Poole from Forward Planning, an economic development scenario, and by Keystone Consulting Engineers on the transportation scenario. That was all based off of the Where Should We Grow survey and the growth and future land use scenario. So those were modeled out, and there's information on the following pages that we can skip through pretty quick. There's no need to relitigate what was already said. They can probably state it better than I could. So hopefully you guys have had some time to review that on your own. I guess for housing, I can mention Todd Poole some of the key points on housing that he mentioned in his report that may come up in our conversation. Due to the where should we grow and growth scenario, he projected that we would need 2,711 additional units. He projected 47% of those to be 3 or 4 bedroom units, including a projection of 5,224 new residents and 1,175 new school-age children. And page 15 and 16 is additional background on the transportation report. And both of these reports can again be found on South Whitehall Township's website, the comprehensive plan blog, and you can also find some information on our subpage for housing. So that brings us finally to Working Group Meeting 1, which will focus on existing conditions for housing in the township. Some items that will be discussed, so again, data from the scenarios that were presented in the introduction meeting. We'll also take a look at what's stated in the most recent comprehensive plan for the township in 2009, and we'll take a look at some updated existing conditions report that were developed as a part of this process, and we'll take a look at some pieces from the overall regional plan, future LV, so that we can consider our place within the larger region. Just as we go through, there's note sections on a lot of these pages, so if you have a thought, just jot it down, and I'm sure it'll come up during our discussion. Our goals for today are to identify significant data trends, identify where updated data or additional information is needed, and to complete the discussion template. Again, we'll complete that here in person. If anyone is streaming online, you can put any input into the chat, and any additional input outside of this time, you can go ahead to the subpage and use the Google form. And so our overall outcome today is to solidify a baseline understanding of current data and information to best inform our recommendation process. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dave to talk about some of the existing conditions for housing and MPC guidelines specific to housing. Yeah.
Earlier you were talking about short and long term.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Specifically, what do you classify as a short-term goal in time, and what's a long-term goal in time?
I would say that would go, the MPC recommends that plans be updated every 10 years. So I would say short term would be anything from 1 to 5 years, and then long term would be 5 to 10 in the comprehensive planning process according to the MPC. Dave?
Those are guidelines.
You're right.
So, as things come up and recommendations come out of this process, the idea is, there may be low-hanging fruit that comes out, and we can make that a one-year goal. So we could have short, medium, long term. And it's kind of looking at everything together. Kind of figure with that, I'll move into kind of the next piece of this. Again, we're using the workbook as our template. So the first part of the workbook is background information. All of that information is available on the website. The housing subpage distributed in emails. And again, if you have questions, by all means, use the contacts. As Chris mentioned, the MPC dictates planning in Pennsylvania. So we're following the MPC guidelines for our topic areas, and the MPC guidelines require a housing section. And there's specific guidelines on what is to be included in the housing section, and I'll just read that section from the MPC. A plan to meet the housing needs of present residents and of those individuals and families anticipated to reside in the municipality, which may include conservation of presently sound housing, rehabilitation of housing in declining neighborhoods, and the accommodation of expected new housing different dwelling types and at appropriate densities for households of all income levels. So that's the state mandated requirements for the housing element, housing section of the comprehensive. The next few pages, we have goals and goal statements from the 2009 plan. Some of them are pretty wordy. Reason we include these is as you're reviewing, this is on page 19.
Right. The goals are on 19, recommendations are on 20.
So the idea of including these in the workbooks is to provide information of things, material for you to make recommendations. Anything that you need more information on, highlight it from here, and we can bring it up for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty wordy, so I don't really want to cover all of them. Or take time for discussion. But the housing opportunity and choices goal is to provide a variety of housing and neighborhood choices for families of all sizes, abilities, and income levels. And a series of statements and recommendations. On the page 21, there's an excerpt from our 2019 existing conditions report with some housing data. The first chart on the upper left is the housing stock by year, or year range. So you can see kind of where the boom in construction in South Whitehall was. And right below that talks about housing sales. We have the number of sales on the left and then the median sales price as well. So you can see kind of the trend is upward, and then there was a spike in the 2017 data. Also included is housing unit tenure. So that refers to rental versus owner occupied. So we've had an increase in rental units in the 2010 and 2015 data points. And then the bottom chart talks to cost burden. So what that means is there's multiple definitions, but roughly it's if you're spending over 30% of your income on or 30% of your income on housing costs. So you can see there's a percentage of the population in South Whitehall that's cost burden.
Which chart is that?
The lower right.
All right.
You don't have here.
The wrong topic.
Well, that's resources. This is resources.
So that's kind of what we use to kind of give a picture of where we were in for the 2009 plans and where we're at now using the existing. During the kickoff meeting, we did a word cloud as well. What is a word you would used to describe housing in South Whitehall? Again, the bigger words are the more popular words. So diverse, dense, varied were the more popular words. With that, we get into discussion. Any questions on that existing conditions summary?
Does the existing summary take into consideration other things that are planned, you think?
And
All the things that are.
so the existing conditions looks at census data. So that's only things that were constructed or people living in the township.
Mm-hmm.
It's under construction.
Correct. There is, as part of the model and the build out, included things that were under construction. When we did the where should we grow, we included things that were in the pipeline, no, things that were approved. If you did we're involved in the where should we grow exercise, Ridge Farm was not included, so people put dots for Ridge Farm, or some of the dots for Ridge Farm on that text. So that was part of the build out. With the model, we did a hypothetical build out, and there was a miscommunication between us and forward planning on this big one, Ridge Farm. So that wasn't included in the economic model, but we're working with them to get that included in the new product that he's launching. So we'll have some ability to include some of the newer projects and look at immediate impacts of proposed projects. Pretty exciting.
I was curious about the apartment complex plan for Gator King to 309 and 23.
That was, so when we did the where should we grow, that was conceptual, so it wasn't very far in the process. The trying to remember, I'll have to double check and see if that was included in the model. Because we had provided information on things in the pipeline, and I'll just have to go back and check what exactly. I'll go through that list and see if my gut is telling me that it was not included in the where should we grow, but it was included in the economic.
Has there been a study that says that we need more apartment complexes?
Not explicitly. We'll have discussion, and LVPC, I'm sure, will kind of talk to housing choice across the valley and the regional perspective of housing attainability. Will be part of the conversation, and that also gets to kind of the $1 million question: is how much is enough of the land uses? And that's the challenge of planning. That's frankly, is striking that balance between providing enough space for the different land uses, and then also not excluding all the land uses. We have to provide for all land uses. So it kind of gets to that point. And that's kind of why we're here going through this exercise.
Dave, one thing I thought was interesting on page 31 of the data is that the single-family attached housing prices are almost equal to the single-family detached. Single-family attached would be twins and townhouses. I assume that's because more of the townhouses are newer and a large number of the single-family detached housing stock is older and smaller.
And I think if you look at the year of the housing stock, the 50 to 59 was a big boom. So that older housing stock typically means lower prices.
Smaller units, all single families are smaller.
So that's mostly the single ring suburb area adjacent to Allen. So suburbia. Near Kratzer, yeah, down south of Walter. It's generally where that house is at.
What's defined by condominium?
So condominium is kind of a tricky one because that refers to the type of ownership. It's an ownership model, not a living unit. So it oftentimes they're characterized as apartments or two flat. So they're captured in that piece.
It's only 1 or 2 units a year though, so.
Well, that's what caught my attention to. It was 0 in 2020. It's curious. More than that.
I don't know why people aren't building more condominiums. I mean, it was hot for a while. I don't know. I don't see many condominiums being built around here.
When you think of the aging of people downsize, get into a one level living condition, alternative ranch homes are far not even would be perfect.
Well, what you see is a lot of developments like the traditions, age-restricted projects, where they don't have any yard maintenance. It's not technically a condominium, it's called a planned development, but it's pretty much the same thing. You own your unit, you own a footprint, you own a porch, but everything else is maintained commonly.
What is the relative?
As far as the condos.
Yeah.
There are some, around Red Valley, but I agree, there's not a push on that. HOAs, all the ones where you have, I think, certainly a lot of people like the HOA concept for many reasons. It has uniformity and exterior maintenance. And with more dwellings today being townhouses, percentage are townhouses as opposed to single family, I think there's nothing more, I'm assuming there's nothing more infuriating than to be one of 5 in a row. And, 4 of the 5 are doing very good maintenance on their property. And the 5th one is the eyesore, as far as mowing, maintenance, any of that kind of stuff. So when you have the HOA, at least, you eliminate that because now everybody's paying for the mowing and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
And it's not just seniors, you see a lot of young people who want to spend their time traveling instead of yard maintenance. Adventure tourism. My kid wants to go off to Mexico and Malaysia and India. He doesn't want to be doing yard maintenance.
Mhm. So I think this could lead right into discussion question 1, if we'd like to get started, which was what information or data do you think is significant? That could be any of the data points that you might want to point out, goals you might have found significant from some of the previous plans, data trends, something from one of the scenarios that was presented. So you can take a second or two to write something down on the Post-its. Then
Do you want it verbally or written?
you can do it verbally, and I can write it down. And then put it up here.
So when we had the virtual, we had it all basically filled out. What we're trying to do is do that here, so that we can capture concerns and questions and information on these pages, and then we'll transfer it to the digital form.
It'll all be digitized.
Yeah.
Well, I think the most significant data is the rapid increase in housing prices, particularly over the last year, and the shortage of supply.
To do with COVID and people moving, cities coming out here now that you work.
That's a lot more flexibility in where they live.
Unbelievably low interest rates.
Yeah,
No, that's true. Revenue, true.
Okay.
yep, that's true.
When I started, they were 11%. And some of the agents in the early 80s said, oh, we started, it was 14.
I remember
Okay.
like 14 or
So
17.
I've seen them all over in my tenure. And 3.5, 3% rather. I mean,
Yeah,
I never ever would have imagined.
yeah. Who's going to loan you money for 30 years at 3%? That doesn't seem to make
Yeah,
sense.
and you can buy more house with the
Well,
lower,
and you can
the lower rate.
And I'm sure probably heard this. With that is what is soaring prices, because people are overbidding multiple offers. When a house comes on the market, they're, what's an extra 10, 20, 30,000 over list? If you average, they want the house, and that's what, in fact, the Lehigh Board of Realtors comes out with stats, and every month, the monthly stats in both Lehigh and Northampton County is 100 point something % of listed sale price. Now think about the type of housing and the areas that you're covering in 2 counties, so to end up at 100%, that means a lot of things the average is being pulled up by things that are way overpriced. I mean, going over.
It's just going to open up a market down the road. People are not going to be able to afford their houses. I believe that. I own 150 apartment houses, and believe me, half of them I purchased
Okay.
on.
My thing
People
is,
couldn't afford.
I've been through this before.
Yeah.
Okay. We had crazy financing, probably about 2008 or something.
2008.
Two package loans.
Oh yeah.
Variables and so on. And what happened, unfortunately, that then at a certain point, now you get the foreclosures
Right.
and the short sales.
Absolutely.
And that too will happen.
Absolutely.
That too will happen.
My sister-in-law's in the process, literally as we speak today, for the last 3 months, looking at. This is Long Island.
Mhm.
Every house she's going to look at, she's downsizing. She lives alone.
Right.
She's 62. Every house she's looked at has been 50 to 110,000 over the asking price.
Yeah.
She made an offer 3 weeks ago. They accepted it. New York is different law than here. Somebody came in after the agreement was signed. It's not a contract, it's an agreement.
So,
And they came in at 40,000 over my sister-in-law. The deal fell through. They went back to her and she said, no. So my wife is up there literally today. They just did an inspection on a property today. I should get a text any minute that they signed the contract. Agreements mean nothing in New York. It has to be a contract.
That's wrong.
100,000.
If you got
Well,
a deal,
my
you
son's
got
an
a deal.
attorney and so is her brother.
I mean, it's wrong that it's set up that way. I'm
Yeah,
not questioning it. It's
well,
true.
everything's agreed and the inspection set up. It's 3 weeks ago. And so she went in on Saturday to buy a house and she made a deal. She said, I'll buy it, but you cannot market it. And the inspection was today and 2:00 and it just came back
Yeah.
well. So she just wants the agreement signed. And, but that's $100,000. She says, no, I'm not going to do that. It's ridiculous. It's
it is crazy.
it's nuts.
And again, there will be a blowback.
Well, it's definitely gonna be good. I can't wait.
Yeah, my daughter bought a house the day the house went up for sale, over asking, no inspection, which is common.
My son has a house in Berwyn where he lives. His neighbor was selling, so he put a open house next Saturday type thing. It was a week away. They took the sign down. They sold the house 3 days after that sign went up. There was no open house at 50,000 over list. And the owner was happy. He said, just take the sign down. We're not even going to have our open house.
I tried to buy a house.
Nuts. I don't know how you young guys are going to do it. Well, you were on the meeting, the last virtual meeting, or maybe it was here. Somebody said, how does my kid buy a house in South Whitehall Township?
It's true.
Oh, yeah, I was,
I have 3 kids that not even can afford a South Whitehall. They live in a horrible country in Franksville, somewhere else.
yeah, there's the parents,
They're lucky.
I think it was
They're not welcoming.
No inspection, it's like 15.
Oh, inspections are out. That. Inspections are out, and you better have cash.
So, we were taking notes during the discussion. One of the things I want to kind of clarify is planning for more condominiums. So is that, when you say condominium, do you mean like ownership of apartment, or do you mean like down the size?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'd like to downsize. I'd like to go to a ranch style home, but they're hard to get by. I would accept an apartment style condominium, everything on one floor. Stairs are getting tougher as we go, if I could have everything in one level, that'd be very attractive.
That's a very strong market. People want to stay in the township.
Yep.
And you need some alternatives so the older people can stay.
But
in
it's
the
also,
township.
like you said, everything's consistent because of the HOA. All 5 houses are well maintained.
In the color.
You don't have 4 that aren't and 1 that's, overgrown. So it's the maintenance on the outside, it's all done. And you're not gonna have the problems where they have to come up with, the other night where they had what was that, the ordinance, with Tom, trying to put through. And there's a handful of people that, if you could drive around the township, you see it. But, it ruins it for everybody.
If you give options for the downsizing people, it also opens up the housing stock for the families.
That's true.
And that's the log jam. A lot of people, they want to downsize. Able to. So it's like that log jam of, normally there's that turnover,
Yeah.
and you'll see neighborhoods turn over, and that's not happening.
But it's downsize affordably.
Yeah.
It's like people want to sell their houses, but where am I gonna go?
Right, you can get great.
Why do I
prices.
want to sell my house and make all this money and then go spend it on another place? What have I gained?
Especially if you can't even buy that other house because
Well,
there's so
exactly.
many people in line.
Yeah, you don't want to do that. Yeah, so you stay put, you don't sell your.
As you go to Home Depot and you make improvements. That's what everybody's been doing.
Question on understand it because transfer of development rights programs.
Where are you?
This is on page 20.
The current plan.
Yes,
Yeah.
2009.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was item 3F. And I'm just thinking of it because there's a lot of interest now in doing farms or preserving farms. But somehow you have to say, well, yeah, I can preserve it, but I'll lose, a lot of money income because I'm not subdividing it into, so is that what the transfer of development rights is? Or
So, yes, transfer of development rights means if you have, open space farm, that's 100 acres, which is 1 acre zone, with 100 development. Have the ability to put 100 units on. Under transfer of development rights, it's a program that's set up. There's different methods to set it up. But there's a program where you can sell those development rights. So you're basically selling off your 100 unit, the ability to put 100 units on your property, selling it to somebody else, and they're taking those development units and putting them somewhere else in the township and getting a bonus. So if they, for example, that would be a sending area. So you're sending your development rights out of that area into a receiving zone. In the receiving zone, you could have the base zoning is just say half-acre lots. But if you're bringing in development rights, you can increase that to quarter-acre lots. So you get more density on that area as a receiving zone. Typically, receiving zones are areas that already have existing infrastructure, areas that make sense to develop, or areas that make sense to redevelop or infill develop. So it's a technique and they're probably having the conversation over in resource protection because it's a tool in the planning toolbox to protect land and increase density where it makes sense. So with regards to housing, typically you find the more dense areas have smaller units. Smaller units typically equals less expensive units, more attainable. So that's, again, that balancing act between preservation and density. And when we talk about density, you can also think about attainable housing. So the concept of downsizing is something that's affordable. You're not going to downsize to a ranch on an acre affordably, typically. So, you downsize to a condo in a 3-story building.
It's like trying to downsize to the 55 more community over there.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's not downsizing for me. The houses are bigger than what I own.
Yeah. So like typically the options here are if you downsize to a townhouse. But the concept of having condos or, they talk about, well, two flats, so they're on top of each other and stacked, are other ways to look at increasing density while maintaining some attainability.
I would just add that it's almost impossible to build low-income housing in new construction. So what we're really talking about when we say attainable or affordable housing is pretty much middle income housing is what you're trying to build.
Yeah.
Why is it impossible?
The construction costs, the improvement costs, the land costs are too high.
What is the requirement as far as the township?
There isn't really a mandate that we have to do a certain amount, but there are fair housing advocates that go around the state and look for zoning that is exclusionary, which means you don't have enough area to put in the smaller, more dense, which typically means lower cost housing. And Charlie brings up the point about affordable and low income. There's affordable low income housing that we think of that's subsidized, but then there's also affordable housing that your kids can afford, Chris can afford, at a fair market price, but it's the smaller unit.
What if we offered that to like floodplain construction companies that this is how they're going to earn their chops? So here's your opportunity to build a portfolio by making these affordable housing. Because I understand the bigger guys are just going to blow it off, like I said. It's
Well,
not-
they're going to want the most expensive houses they can sell.
Exactly. We would offer that to floodplain or
There are ways to incentivize it.
minority type one.
Yeah.
They need that opportunity to pick their feet in the door.
Yep. Yeah, and there's that scenario it's tricky because as the township, we don't own property. Well, we own some property, but we're not in the business of developing property. So it's up to the private landowner to develop his property if he wants to develop his property. Typically, when a developer wants to develop property, they want to get their most money for the property, the project. So that's why if you put incentives on it, let's say you can get, if you make your housing affordable, you can get an extra 5 units. If it's, marketed in this range. So that's an incentive for them. They'll get more units equals more money if they're done at the different.
But then you get 2.5% mortgage from HUD if you do low cost housing. But it's just don't do it in my backyard, and that's the whole problem you're going to have. Everywhere you do it, you can do it, just don't do it in my backyard.
Yeah, some of the
That's what you're
affordable.
going to hear it we're having it now with every little nook and cranny in this township. That's the Park Ridge and everywhere else. So.
When you, I guess I just want to make sure that I'm on the same page. When you're talking affordable housing, are you talking like for lower income specifically, like government subsidized, like Cumberland Gardens or
I'm
that type?
just saying that units that are reasonably priced. You're not going to get the,
Okay.
bells and whistles, and you're going to get construction grade type of things in there. You're not
Okay,
gonna
so
get the grant.
they would still be for
Something they-
sale.
Somebody is entering the market.
Right, just getting out of school who wants to get a starter house.
You're not going to get the
Sorry.
granite countertops. You're not going to
If the townships, I'm sorry, if the township's writing the incentives, you can decide what type of housing you're marketing, you're emphasizing, because it's the township doing the incentives. The federal programs have their own income limits, but that money is not widely available.
So
Yeah.
I used to work in New Jersey. New Jersey has the Fair Housing Act, and they mandated every municipality within a certain their fair share to provide their fair share of affordable housing. And when I was working in New Jersey, we used to refer to affordable housing, the capital A, was the Affordable Housing and Fair Housing Act. And then lowercase a was affordable housing for, it's all sometimes referred to as workforce housing. So housing that teachers can afford, police officers, people making that middle income. Is kind of what I refer to as the lowercase a.
What do we want to get done today? Just
Good point. Great discussion. And one of the reasons we have these workbooks is we're trying to kind of stay on task. And at the end, we get to a point where we have key findings and things that we want to push forward into the next meeting, or topics that we want to discuss with the subject matter experts. We have that in mind.
I realize it was my fault bringing up development rates, but I took another one, information data that's significant, I think, is projected population, because that's how many units we have to do. And I just find, and I'm willing to live with it if that's the right number, but 29% growth is pretty impressive for this area.
Is that where the 2711 comes from? I think
So,
I said, yeah, it's a bit.
yeah,
Right.
so that is a hypothetical based on, so we did the exercise, we put the dots on the map of where, and then we looked at the visual preference of what was preferred for each combination. And those pictures kind of had an associated density with them, so we applied that to each of the hexagons.
So where did 29 come from, Bill?
That's in the, it's actually in the existing conditions document.
So that would be,
Oh, okay.
we didn't include that.
And I'll just tell you, because I wrote it down because I was curious, okay, what number are we working with? The current population in South Whitehall Township, and this is not census, it's 21,000 about. And the projection is to go to 25,000. And the discussion says, you know, and that started actually, it was from the last report. It said the growth is 29%. And I'm sitting here saying, well, you know, Pennsylvania just lost representatives in the House of Representatives, you know, and, you know, where, you know, is everybody in Pennsylvania moving to South Whitehall? You know, it just seems like,
A lot of people are moving to the Lehigh Valley.
but it just seems like that's a very high number. I don't know if the school district has numbers like that also.
Not that high,
So,
but absolutely we have high numbers. When we look at the school district, we don't look at South Whitehall Township. You're looking at, I mean, look what we did at Jandal, veterans. I mean, 2 schools in the last 10 years. High school's good right now. There's room to grow. But I made a comment at the last meeting. The guy's totally off base when he has those numbers. These old schools their enrollments are down. I said, excuse me. South Whitehall's growing, and so is Parkland School District growing. So you have a combination. People are moving here because of Parkland, North Whitehall, Upper Macungie, because of Parkland. We've been somewhat stagnant, but not declining at all.
And okay, and I say growth, but 29% is like, you know, we should be California by.
so 29% is that number the number that came out of the
2009. Well, no, it's in the document.
2040 projections?
Yeah.
From the Lehigh Valley.
Yeah,
By what year?
2040.
2040.
So, yeah, I'd say
It's a lot.
the school could be looking, I mean, we're just adding 12 classrooms at Kratzer for one reason, only for one reason, Ridge Farms. Totally missed in his projections.
Well, and that's important also. That's because I just went through that because I went through, you know, there are 870 units in Ridge Farm. And I just added it up today from the planning commission document in June when Greg did that. It's various at 870 units. In these documents, it says there are an average of 2 people per unit. You know, and I'm not going to get into are we, you know, for, you know, separate housing or townhouses or what, or apartments. The average is 2 people per unit. So that takes care of, you know, 1,740 people.
Yeah.
You know,
it's
and
not,
then you've got KRE, you've got Regency, you've got the Blue Barn Road, And those are the ones I can think off of the top of my head that maybe are another 500 units. I don't know that all of them are included. Because I went through the calculation using the 2 people per unit. And I could say we need an additional 500 versus the 2,700 to meet that.
To meet the
To meet-
2040.
Yeah, and I didn't try to, knock that down any, although I have a
Yeah,
question.
Going down that's kind of a slippery slope, because when you do planning and zoning, you're looking at long-term, big picture possibility. So it doesn't mean that every piece of land that's zoned is going to get developed. So that's kind of what that hypothetical build out was if every piece of land got built out this way, this is what could potentially happen. So, development is contingent on the market. If the market is good, they're going to build houses. If the market's bad, they're not going to build houses. And you don't know which properties they're going to look at, who's ready to develop. So to like pinpoint it and say we need 500 units, so let's plan for 500 units.
Understood.
It's kind of,
Yeah, but it's just how do you proceed? If you say, well, we need all this housing, well, maybe we do, but maybe we could say, well, we've already got a bunch, let's let that go. And, some people think we went too far that way and, maybe we'll find that out. But it could, you say, well, we've got that, let's look at the infill and
so,
go
and
that
I
way
think
instead.
that's kind of where this conversation we're trying to get to is, or as housing the topic, what do we as a group want to see? What are the main,
Right.
what's the data that's significant? Why is it significant? And then getting into key findings and things that are of a high concern. And the issue of attainability for kids out of school to stay in South Whitehall.
Yeah,
Affordability with the lower income.
I remember one thing Becky Bradley said from some of the surveys that Lehigh Valley Planning Commission has done. She said there's a lot of people who would like to live in senior communities without the age restriction. She says when you look at some of the traditions projects that are built throughout the whole area, you've got no yard maintenance, you've got walkability, you've got trails, you've got walkable streets, you have a community center, you have recreation areas close by, you have open space, you have lots of landscaping, medium density overall. And she says, why can't we allow that and just get rid of the age restriction? Well, it could be even a singles, could be twins, could be townhouses, yeah. But you're right, it's a condominium system.
It could be a condo.
It could be any of those.
Yes,
20% of them still have to go to under 55. By law.
if you have the restriction.
By law, it has to go.
But the thought
20% has
was,
to go by law.
but you could just
Still.
encourage those projects without the age restriction. That type of community design.
They'll say we need for 500. You say, well, we don't even own the land, so we don't determine how it's built. Well, so how do we get from you need those 500 units to making that happen?
So there's a couple things. So Bill's comparing the 500 units to the projection, which is a projection and there's issues with projections, but it's a long-term projection. So that's used to kind of give us an idea of what we need to zone for to accommodate future growth. What is that future growth? And, so we can accomplish that by zoning, allowing, recommending areas for certain housing. And, if we're looking for these types of projects that are affordable, attainable, encouraging those. It's areas that make sense for them.
Keyword is on.
Yeah, so the comprehensive plan will, the end result after it goes to the planning commission will recommend a future land use. That future land use is then used to recommend zoning changes based on that.
And that's the incentive for the landowners to sell.
People knock on their doors, even if they don't want to sell.
If the zoning's good and there's incentives in there. it's
Well, it gets back to every township around here but us, it has farmland preservation.
Mhm.
Southwest doesn't have it. So that's a whole nother issue. We're starting, and that's involved in housing, you know, because if it's preserved, then it's not gonna be a
It
development.
has to be decided
And
that
that's
we need
big.
the farming.
Well-
So we have to decide, yes, we need the farming.
Now, there's some costs involved in that, I guess, and I don't, it seems like, and I don't know all that, something I want to learn, to tell you the truth, but,
Yeah, there is a cost.
you know, and is the community willing to pay that?
Well,
Now, maybe they weren't 10 years ago.
You're right,
maybe
you're
they
right.
are
Now, well, with all the uprisings with Ridge Farms and everything else that's going on, maybe the
But it's
community.
still something that says, yeah, we can do that, but your taxes are gonna go way up.
Well, that's the $1 million question. How do you build it in? I have a plan on how to do it, but I'm not gonna discuss it here, not until I get elected as a
You
commissioner.
could actually think of an argument too, when, you know, with this farmland preservation, I saw Lower Country just did that,
Right.
okay?
Right.
So there is some increase in mileage or whatever. But on the other hand, you know, take just what, I'm sorry, were you the one that said about the classroom, the additions to Kratzer?
Oh, yeah.
How many? Okay, you know, when you're talking about that farmland going into, how many units did we say over at 870 units at Ridge Farms? How many kids, how many? There's a cost involved. Yes, there's taxes and so on and so forth, but there's also education cost and so on and so forth. And I think the biggest problem that I see and I hear people complaining about, we still have pretty much the same road system we had when I moved here in the 70s. Auburn Avenue kind of sort of looks like I always remember it. Cedar Crest Boulevard looks like I remember it. And I mean, I'm already, you know, appalled at some of the traffic that I see, even early afternoon on Cedar Crest
So,
Boulevard.
one of the things with comprehensive plan, one of the things that was a concern as we broke into different groups, is everything is entwined.
I'm sorry.
Entwined. So housing, transportation, it's all entwined. So the idea is to focus on housing here. And then those recommendations go to the planning commission. The comprehensive plan workshops, the planning commission kind of looks at it all in the big picture, kind of puts it all together. So I kind of want to get back to housing.
Right.
But it's all valid and yes, it all makes sense and definitely. So
I've already sort of started to summarize some responses for number 2, which is why would some of this be significant. Like I did mention pressures on road systems that doesn't relate to housing, but I kind of want to get back to some of the significance behind, you know, maybe why you think it's important to be open for lower income housing or for South Whitehall Township.
I don't even think you're talking low income housing.
I think
I wouldn't even
that's
use
the
those
right
words.
word.
Yeah.
I think that's the term.
Affordable middle income.
smaller.
And it's not that low income housing is important. It's just that it's not going to happen without massive subsidies.
Right. What about why would it be a broad question, you know, significant to allow for housing for younger generations or kids to move out of their parents' homes in this township? Why would that be?
Because the parents are tired of them. That's why.
Eating all.
School, graduate. Doesn't mean it's going to expand the schools. You help, but it's,
It'll
but
keep it from
it's gonna go.
shrinking.
Yeah.
There's a concern that some communities become unbalanced, that if their housing becomes too expensive, they miss the young people. You know, they miss that energy, they miss the young professionals moving in, they miss the related activity in the restaurants and stuff. So you need to really have a balanced community with all age groups involved.
Yeah, you become an elitist.
Exclusionary would be the, right.
So where do we have to get to after, how many more of these charts?
We can jump to the next one because we've kind of been discussing some things with both.
Yes.
So.
You have enough to come up with a plan, you guys, to put something down.
So the next one is where geographically these things.
I'd suggest you need to look at where there's capacity to be able to improve roads and where you cannot improve roads.
That's one thing. The other thing in South Whitehall is Huckleberry Ridge, because you don't have sewer, you can't have more concentrated housing. You have to have district. You have to have septic system, and you need to make it minimum. And with one question now is, have we gotten to the point where we don't want to put more concentration there because we've got concentration other places, and that's a key question in my mind. Do we want to have that, or maybe the township, maybe the value of the town, the property in the township is better, living is better with less concentration up there. It's the countryside as people envision it.
I think that's the key. That's what's happening in South Whitehall right here. I don't think people are, I could be wrong, but if Ridge Farms, and we'll pick on that because it's kind of a done deal. But if Ridge Farms wasn't 870 homes and they came with this beautiful plan of, neighborhoods and trails and everything, and it was, I don't know, I'm at about 350, I don't think you would have seen the outcry that you've had in this township. But when it was a lot higher than 870 at one time. But I don't think you would have had the problems in the township, the meetings. The same thing with some of the other communities. You're saying maybe you take you take the land and you don't make it as dense. Depending on where it is, because of the roads. If we do the roads, it's a catch-22. If you don't do the roads, you're gonna have the same. You're gonna be looking at Walford Avenue for the rest of your life. It's not being an improvement.
Can we look at blighted areas, properties that are condemned or will be condemned or blighted? And that would be something that if you tore that down and put something there, it's going to be better than what they have. So it'd be less, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Considerations where areas that might exist that could use some rehabilitation of housing.
Yeah, so are there missing areas in South Whitehall that typically it's a common practice in urban areas. South Whitehall, we have blighted. We don't have many blighted.
No, I pretty much could say, I think that there's a home here, you drive by that home.
You might have like
Yeah.
And you drive by this, but to say, is there like a street or?
I'm saying individual.
yeah. So I think perhaps that's a discussion. At least we can start having a discussion.
I
was
think
thinking like in Cruzville there, I don't know if that's but they had that motel complex. It's going lighted. Now we're going to build something else.
Kmart's one like that could be.
There you go.
We did have a couple of, we did have some lighted-ish hotels.
Right.
That may be opportunity. opportunities for redevelopment.
That's what I'm talking about.
And like
The
Charlie
low-
talked
low-hanging
about,
fruit.
like Charlie talked about, is if the zoning's there and the developer can make money on it, they're gonna not have to.
Could the hotel become a condominium?
Exactly.
So those are things to consider.
Are you
One of the
talking
things-
during the Parkview?
See, and that's,
Not necessarily.
I think we have to take Parkview off the table tonight. I mean,
Okay.
Bill's sitting in the room, he gets plenty.
yeah,
I mean, no offense, but I don't think we should.
especially if there was. see. Hold
Well, I'm not on the VOC yet,
on.
but, I mean,
You know,
no offense, Bill, but I don't want to,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's a couple, there's one right off of 23, 22. There's one over by the carpeting or something.
Houseman Road?
Yeah, that's the one on Hampton Road. So there's a couple of them that are,
there's pockets here and there where that could
that
actually
might
be
be an
done.
opportunity.
Right, those things that go out, I would be first. Yeah.
One of the things geographically, Bill mentioned the Huckleberry Ridge. Yeah, the Huckleberry Ridge, generally developments occur south of the ridge. And then we have Jordan Valley. So what do we think as a group for the Jordan Valley and housing? Is that something that we would want to encourage housing or discourage housing in general?
I would encourage it, but again,
See your question.
as you said, with the size of the lots, possibly, half acre to an acre lot, because it's gonna be all sewer or septics.
Yeah, so they can't be, it's an acre.
Yeah, well,
Basically.
that was actually cut back. I had to fly home from Florida because I bought a land between two houses, and it was an acre, and they said, just to tell them I could build a house there, which was 30 years ago, but
So I guess the question is, does it make sense to, if septic is an issue? One of the other groups is utilities. They're struggling with the growth areas that were in the 2009 plan. From the housing perspective, does it make sense to encourage sewers up in that area and put more density geographically? Or it's a big question for us to consider from a housing perspective. Or is it something that we want to focus on redevelopment, rehabilitation, infill? So those are things, we don't have to really talk about it now, but things to consider when we're talking about the geography. And we have a very defining characteristic.
And to me, there's three things. One again is that's where some of the farms are. And then the cost is actually significant. Both the roads and the sewers are major costs that aren't, we already have the roads. We don't, but there's less roads and sewers needed in areas south of the river. So to me, there's a lot of forces that say, until you really want to, I would say that would be, look for, well, and the whole thing seems like you got to look for where you want to preserve first, so that you don't build on and where are those places? A lot of them, I think, are in that general direction.
And optimize what you already have.
Yeah.
I know last time the facility is one of our potential recommendations was preserve, or looking to preserve some of the ridge and acquiring some of that township. So I think just as we regroup all the groups together, say we recommend, housing up there, among those things.
And yeah, one of the things, talk about it, looking at things in the silos. We're looking at focusing on housing that makes sense from a housing perspective. If it makes sense from a housing perspective and we want to make those recommendations, we should go ahead and make those recommendations because it gets to the planning commission. And they're tasked with balancing these different recommendations. If there are any that don't make sense or conflict, they're going to be the ones to say, this one. So I, again, think of it as from a housing perspective. As a group, we want to recommend to the planning.
Anything else, Jerry? Any topics? Before we move on? Not, we can get into any potential disagreements. Something that you maybe think the data inaccurately reflects whether or not a goal disagree with the goal of the old plan that you don't realize in 2021. Disagreements, I think we already heard some disagreements with some of the projections, and again, they are hypothetical.
I just suggest that some of the wording in the old plan is a little hard to understand. The transects, I don't think most people know what a transect is, or a T1 or a T2.
I think the overlay has got to be a big issue. Making sure, with the overlay, that's a big concern.
With regard to the language in the plan, one of the things we discussed last night, some of the language was vague. So that one of the action items was consider X, Y, and Z. So it wasn't a very actionable verb. So it wasn't considered to mean any number of things. So the idea of having action items and implementable language is a future comp plan. So, kind of avoiding some of this ambiguous language that you interpret in multiple ways.
I think we need to get back to your visual survey that you did with the public. It clearly showed an interest in walkable communities near open space with an ability to be close to some type of store where you wouldn't have to drive for everything. I think that needs to be tied directly into the housing plan, the findings of those surveys of the public. Lots of landscaping, walkable, bikeable communities.
Because I think one thing you saw, at least I did it where I live during the pandemic, is a lot of younger people from our neighborhood or others I didn't even recognize. I don't know who they were. You just see them walking, like you said, walking or not so much biking, but walking their dogs. People I never even saw before.
And the trails were packed.
Well, yeah. I did the trails a couple times, my wife and I, and took our dog. They were, and so I think that, as Charlie said, the biking kids, younger people love to do that. Not some older people too.
And it's property values. Being accessible to a trail
So
has a major influence on property values too.
the LVPC asking those who and we demonstrated an increased value across integrated by county. Increased value for homes closer to space. So that might be something we can talk to LVPC about.
And you can see it in the names of a lot of housing developments. They're called the preserve at blank, and they stress in all their marketing that you're next to trails and 15 acres of preserved open space, and you look out your back deck and you see all this great woodland. So it does become a major marketing thing that helps to increase property values. In addition to trying to make people healthier too. Yes, and ideally reducing short vehicle trips. Yes. You can walk for milk as opposed to drive for it.
overgrown, so there was a duck or fox style.
Oak Woods up, yeah, yeah.
Any other disagreements?
I guess, not that it's a disagreement, but just, God forbid that 10 or 15 years from now, not me, but, a group of people aren't sitting in this room, saying, look what they did in 2021, at South Whitehall Township. That'd be hard to take, and we have to learn from whatever the mistakes were in '09, or, take the good and then, move forward with that.
Yeah, really, it's involved too much more in taxes, only as I lived in South Whitehall until about 2 years ago. Where did the overlay district come from? When was that something that was done, Tim, in the last planning thing 10 years ago?
And I was involved in the plan, so I do have some. It was done in the '09 plan, and the intent is to mix. It was to have mixed neighborhoods, so that you have the shopping, instead of having shopping's over there, houses over here, and you have to drive from one to the other. And that's the way the zoning is traditionally has been set up, is to say, okay, now you can overlay, and you can have some shops and smaller house, and things on top of that, and mix it so that it's more walkable community. So,
And the other piece of it is to incentivize certain development, right? To have the mixed use with a certain amount of open space, and have X number of percentage of open space, you get a unit.
And then certain ones were designated like an overlay district.
Yes.
in 09.
Well, it was after the '09 plan, the plan made recommendations, and those recommendations before zoning changes, including it was sometime
the overlay,
10, 12, 13.
I think the zoning map was like 2004. It took
Okay.
it took 5 years to, after the plan for others to put that together. Okay.
Anything in citizen positions prior to you? Maybe you're surprised at the accomplishments and goals or goals that we've been accomplished, or some of the great trends that you surprising. Anything in that realm? We touched on some of this already. Go over anything again.
I think it's surprising there's only 5 people.
My meeting yesterday, there was only 3.
I mean, I'm not counting you.
No, I was
Yeah,
gonna
yeah.
say our own people online.
Well, that's true.
How many people are online?
I don't know.
At the last virtual meeting, people attended.
Yes.
The last one? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was. More than 5.
And that's one of the reasons that we, for the comp plan meetings, we okay with early virtual. Again,
Yeah, I wanted to come Monday, but I had public safety, so, it's a toss up. Like, what do you do?
It's convenient. It's definitely convenient.
I've got an item for number 6 if you want to jump ahead.
Yeah, sure. We got 12 minutes until 7.
There's always a concern that the people making the decisions are older homeowners, and they're missing out on the people who want to move into the community if they're not involved in the process. And the people who fill out the surveys are typically older, long-term homeowners.
So,
They're the people who show up at the meetings.
yes, typically you'll find public engagement, people that have the time.
Well, they have the most invested
And
too.
they have the most invested. and engagement is very hard. Busy working moms and families that have soccer practices, partners around. One of our earlier meetings, and I think how much it was been on and off. So it's important for us to get that hear from that population. And with the survey, because the way we administered the survey, the visual preference survey, the way we administered it, it allowed us to do weighting. So we had different generations. If we ever the, one of the questions is what years were you born? So we were able to statistically validate based on population and weight responses so that we get a better picture of the whole community. So,
I mean, just give you one example, daycare. You know, if you ask an older person whether the township should allow new daycares, they might say, no, it's not that important. You ask a young parent, they're going to say, we need a lot more daycares. There aren't enough. We really need to deal with this.
We saw that with the school. Just the opposite of what you're saying. It's all the younger people because they had young kids in school. It wasn't the high school parents or even the middle school to some extent, but it was mostly the younger parents who had young kids who maybe had to quit their job because they had to stay home and do the virtual with their kid.
So
So
see more and more businesses putting daycare in their building as well.
to get employees, and that's, yeah, what are you gonna do with your kid? I mean, if I make $100 a day and I got to pay $50 to daycare or whatever, I mean, am I really making any money?
And if you got 3 kids, it's almost like a mortgage.
Yeah, that's true.
No, you're right. How did it turn out? I'm just kidding, Dave. How did that weighted turn out? Did you feel you did okay with the younger?
we didn't get a ton of responses, but again, we were able to weight it. And the report should be ended this week. The report should be out at the end of this week. Some of the responses, generational preference. The common data is going to be out. That's the final.
Would you weight it on like, you didn't have that many survey, but this is how many in the population?
So if we had 10% baby boomer and as population, response rate was 50% baby boomer. And it was the opposite for Gen X.
Yeah.
We kind of balanced it.
Do we know the average age of the residents in South Whitehall Township?
Actually, in the existing conditions.
It is in the existing.
And what you should do is compare it to like county average or something. You got a perspective. Is it probably skews heavily towards people in their 40s and 50s, I would
It's
imagine.
definitely
Oh, yeah. I got you. I should get my own neighborhood.
And
Field, yeah.
the reason I mention that is I think if you had a cross section of the population involved in this type of discussion, housing prices would be even more important than amongst this group.
And that's one of the reasons that talk about children, kids not being able to afford to buy housing and stuff. That thinking of it from their perspective.
Anything else that might be missing, factors that in housing, reports, data that may be nice to have specific housing?
I'd like to see some data about what's happened in the last year. Because, you look at housing prices, and some of that you can just look at some examples. You don't even have to have complete data. But just look, if you were shopping for a new townhouse, could you find anything in the township under 200,000? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that would be helpful to know. Although the stuff on Walbert Avenue, I imagine, is not that expensive. It's the older, what's that country? country crossings. They're over 200,000?
Yeah.
Okay, that used to be some of the more affordable housing.
Maybe they got a garage at some point. Excuse me, I can't remember all the names, but everyone's patrolling now. You know, the one up in the back there. Yeah, single car garages. 2-car garage. I mean, not park cars in them, but they got the 2-car garage. They want 2.5 baths. They've got, you know, they want more. Okay. Definitely 3 bedrooms, sure. And not only a living room, but usually open kitchen, family area. So people want more than they could before.
Well, the other thing I find is that apartments, they're mainly being built with 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom. So the new apartments are not really meeting the family need that much.
Yeah.
They're not building many 3-bedroom apartments anywhere.
The market just looks like it.
What's the, I don't know what it's even called, what's the apartments, from St. Luke's West, what's that one?
Situni Road.
What's those apartment complexes called?
Maybe one.
Yes, I mean, when they're for our upper class, I mean, our middle to upper, we get like 12 kids out of there from school, that's it. It's all, it's young professionals.
What is the occupancy?
Yeah, you know, it's supposed to be one a year for 10 years, and they build them all. You know, as I asked a question before for our school director, and he said 12 kids, because it's all young professionals.
That's interesting. My son lives in a similar complex in Alexandria, and they probably have 300 units in his building. There's probably 300 dogs and no kids in that project.
They're not cheap. They're not cheap.
They're similar to Springview. I looked at Springview. And downtown is cheaper than Springview.
More amenities.
Well, you're paying a premium for Parkland School District. That's
Right.
But so you don't
But
get-
as you said, they're not.
12 kids out of there.
investing in
Yeah,
this.
it was 12. We thought we'd get a lot more. We got 12.
You have parking?
Yes. Yeah, garage, right.
Most people are delaying, people don't have kids and, you know, as much. Like, years ago, have families, by the time they hit 30, they have a couple of kids. That's, you know.
birth rates are down too. They thought they were going to go up during the
No, they're
pandemic,
down.
but they went down.
Right.
So, and again, that, you know, fits in with a lot of other things. So living in an apartment, like Springview, I guess if you're a young professional with no kids, that would be appealing. Frankly, if you could give me a free apartment over in Springview, I would say thanks, but no thanks.
Well,
You know.
I think it's a little too dense and a little too
I agree
tall.
with you. I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Renting, you're throwing your money away. That's the part.
But yet, if I had 50 more apartments, I could rent every one of them. I get 5 to 6 calls a day on rentals.
I will just do the short version. I have an investor that doesn't townhouses stuff, rentals, mostly in Parkland. And had one this spring over at Country Crossing, okay, where he has support. I could not believe it. I mean, unlike the one in Schnecksville last June, they were coming in overnight through the next day. I thought, what is going on? We couldn't possibly. I mean, you know, are you kidding? What? I want to see it. I want to see it. I want to see it. And I talked to 1 or 2 other local agents who were working with a renter to find a rental, and they said it's unbelievable. And you can just, you have any doubts about the migration to the valley, that showed it to me.
It's,
And prices are skyrocketing in the city of Allentown. So people are, you know, the affordable choices aren't so easy to find anymore. No, I saw a study from the New York Times that said that most of the movements were still within an hour or two of where they were working because they're expecting to have to go to work a few days a week. It's not going to be.
My neighbor goes to New York once every other week.
Yeah.
He works in New York City. He moved in with his parents because he was in a high rise in Jersey City and his dad's in New York because they there with COVID. He's still there. He goes to New York once every 2 weeks for work.
Maybe in 2025, you can ride your foot on the train.
I don't think it's going to be done then.
I don't think that's gonna be done. That would be nice. I like that. But not my lifetime.
Norfolk Southern's going to do everything they can to stop it.
Oh my gosh.
Doing overtime on key takeaways.
Yeah, so any just broad takeaways, broad ideas, things that came out of this discussion that we don't want to get lost as we move on to some of the different pieces.
I just have one last thought. The whole idea of clustering of housing, what it does is it has a medium density overall, but you reduce your improvement cost per unit because you have less road, less sidewalk, less sewer line per unit. So it's a way to have middle income housing and still have open space. So the open space becomes a positive thing in helping to keep the housing prices reasonable. So you just need to allow more narrow units in some cases, more narrow lots, with open space being part of it. Well, I mean, for instance, if you have a 100-foot wide lot versus a 70-foot wide lot, it's a big difference in cost per unit. And the difference you can put into the open space to make the trails work.
Uses narrower lots, you can get a bonus. Incentivize the housing.
The improvement cost is a big part. You know, the cost of all the sewer lines and the water lines and the sidewalks and the curbs and the streets is a huge part of housing costs.
Start to look towards recommendations.
The other piece of it is, we'll be going through everything that was discussed in the city workdown. I think we had it.
I think a lot of things were thrown out.
The other piece.
A lot of stickies.
If you're thinking about something on the way home and you say, I should talk about this, we have a Google form. It's on the site. Just fill that out and set up the same exact way. Would you do that? Do that. Or once the video gets posted, have other people watch it and they can add things through that video. And thank you everyone for taking some time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So remind us next meeting will be Tuesdays around 20, 6 to 7:30. Which would be.
If I can ask a favor, do you have access to the sales data of the township? Could you look up like what prices have been in the last year or the last 6 months?
Yeah, so I mean, I track Parkland like at least a couple of times a day. Because that's, you know, my primary, I live here. And like I said, it's unbelievable.
It would be interesting to see some recent data because a lot of this data that we get from the government is, you know.
The average is up 7%. Parkland, I don't know if we have, if the board comes out with, I mean, I can give you specifics of this one when, talking with somebody today who's also real estate, you know, in a different firm, but she was talking about one, that house and it went, you know, like 50,000 over something. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that I had I have people, fireside session in March, when you talk about what's different. They were in a competition. They were very well qualified. They didn't have a home sale. You better not have a contingent on a home sale. You better not have a contingent on, fuzzy financing. They were well over. I would never tell a buyer to not do a home inspection, okay? Because
But they are.
exactly. Well, no, wait a minute.
Still, you know what I think?
So much down, they didn't.
Oh, we looked at apartments where to even make an offer, you had to put a deposit